Welcome back to Quick Country History. Today we're diving into the story of a nation that's home to over 800 languages and a history that stretches back an incredible 60,000 years, Papua New Guinea. To really get your head around Papua New Guinea, you have to think on a totally different timescale. This isn't just a story about the last few hundred years. It's one of the longest continuous human stories on the entire planet. We're talking up to 60,000 years ago, when the first people walked here from Southeast Asia across a land bridge to an ancient continent we now call Sahul. So that brings us to the big question, right? How on earth did this incredible mosaic of cultures with literally hundreds of distinct languages ever become one single nation? That's the central puzzle we're going to explore today. And to find the answer, we have to go all the way back to the beginning. For tens of thousands of years, the rugged terrain of New Guinea, all these mountains and valleys, acted like a giant incubator for human culture. All these unique societies developed in relative isolation from each other, creating a human landscape that's just unlike anywhere else on Earth. The timescale here is just staggering. We see people arriving around 50,000 BC. But then, get this, in the highlands, there's proof of agriculture from around 7,000 BC. Just think about that for a second. That's as old as farming in Mesopotamia. This makes it one of only a handful of places on Earth where people invented agriculture completely on their own. And much later, you have the seafaring Lapita people showing up, bringing things like pottery and expanding the trade networks that were already crisscrossing the islands. This quote, wow, it's pretty intense, but it gives you a raw glimpse into just how complex and, frankly, confronting these societies could be to an outsider. Practices like headhunting and ritual cannibalism weren't just random acts of violence. They were deeply embedded in warfare and spiritual rituals, often about absorbing an enemy's strength. So for millennia, these societies are developing on their own, separated by geography. But that all starts to change in the 16th century, when the sails of European ships appear on the horizon. First came the Portuguese, then the Spanish, charting these coastlines and kicking off a chain of events that would change the island's destiny forever. And this is actually where the country's name comes from. It's two different colonial-era observations kind of mashed together. The word Papua likely comes from a Malay term describing the distinctive frizzy hair of the local people. Then, a couple of decades later, a Spanish explorer comes along and thinks the people remind him of those on the Guinea coast of Africa, so he calls it New Guinea. And these two names would eventually come to represent two separate colonial territories. So, in 1884, with basically no regard for the people living there, European powers just drew a line on a map and split the eastern half of the island. The Germans took the north and ran it like a business, focusing on plantations. The British took the south, mostly just to keep the Germans from expanding further. Then in 1906, they handed over their slice to the newly formed nation of Australia to look after. This division, literally drawn on a map in Europe, would shape the island for decades. But then the 20th century arrives, bringing two world wars that would totally shatter that old order. These global conflicts brought unbelievable destruction, but they also, for the very first time, would unite the entire eastern half of the island under a single government. The first big shift happened fast. When World War I breaks out in 1914, Australian forces move in and capture German New Guinea. After the war, the League of Nations basically made it official, telling Australia, you're in charge now. So for the first time, both the North and the South were under Australian control, even though they were still managed as two separate territories. But World War II? That was a whole other level of devastation. In 1942, Japanese forces invaded, and New Guinea became one of the most brutal battlegrounds of the entire Pacific War. The human cost was just mind-boggling. Around 216,000 combatants died during the campaign. It was truly horrific. Amidst all that horror, though, you find these incredible stories of courage. During the brutal fighting along the treacherous Kokoda Trail, local Papuans became a lifeline for Allied forces. The Australian soldiers called them the Fuzzy Wuzzy Angels. They acted as guides, carried supplies, and escorted injured soldiers through that impossible jungle terrain, saving countless lives. After the war, Australia formally combined the two territories into a single entity. And that shared experience of the war, plus this new unified government, it sparked something new. A sense of common identity that had never really existed before. This was the real starting point for the journey towards becoming a nation. And that journey happened step by step. The 1949 Union was the first key move. Then, a huge leap forward in 1964 with a House of Assembly that for the first time had a majority of Papua New Guinean members. From there, things moved fast. Self-governance in 73, with Michael Somare as the first chief minister, and then boom, just 2 years later, on September 16, 1975, Papua New Guinea becomes a fully sovereign state.
Independence Day was a massive, momentous achievement, but the work of building a unified, stable country out of that incredible diversity, well, that was really just beginning. And the new nation faced enormous hurdles right away. I mean, trying to create a single national identity from over 800 cultures is a monumental task. You saw it in the political instability, with frequent changes in government. The most severe challenge was the Bougainville conflict, a brutal 9-year civil war over a giant copper mine that cost an estimated 20,000 lives. Add to that a heavy reliance on resource extraction, ongoing corruption, and a resurgence of tribal fighting. It's been a tough road.
And that Bougainville conflict is still one of the nation's biggest challenges. As part of the peace agreement, they finally held a non-binding referendum on independence in 2019. The result was an absolute landslide. Over 98% voted for independence. 98%! This has set the stage for some incredibly complex and sensitive negotiations with the national government about the island's future.
And that brings us right back to the central question for Papua New Guinea today. How can it balance the powerful forces of regional identity, which you see so clearly in Bougainville, with the need for national unity? Answering that, while also tackling all those deep-seated economic and social challenges, is what will define the next chapter for this remarkable and complex nation.
Thank you so much for watching. If you want to understand more about how countries around the world came to be sure to subscribe to Notebook Summaries and check out our Quick Country Histories playlist. You'll find a lot more explainers just like this one.